Thank you very much, Dr. Bebe, and good afternoon to everybody. So I'll go straight into my presentation given the time. Climate change is recognized, of course, as a very complex problem. And I think we need to recognize what is it about it that brings about this complexity. So we have actually three major components of this complexity problem, one of which is its dynamic complexity, where cause and effect are basically separated in time and space. Okay, you can consider, for example, the warming of a lake, and that warming of the lake is going to generally change the regime within which the aquatic ecosystems live and may move them into a regime whereby they are stressed and you get a total change in that ecosystem. So something that starts off at the beginning generates a problem which one can actually see later on in time. And we also have a lot of social complexity when you come and look at the problem of climate change. We have many different actors dealing with the same thing, and people look at things differently. You know, an economist or a businessman will look at a forest and see, you know, the trees in terms of dollars, while an ecologist will see the trees in terms of the ecosystem function that they actually provide. So there's a lot of complexity there. And then there's also the generative complexity. In essence, climate change is a new problem to us. It is unfamiliar to us. And basically, we have to move towards learning to generate solutions through learning, solutions to this problem. And this is why we need to have multi and transdisciplinary approaches. And by transdisciplinary approach, I mean that we also involve society right from the problem definition stage and through to generating the solution that we require in order to adapt or mitigate the impacts of climate change. Now, when you look at things from a multidisciplinary perspective, you basically need to be able to integrate knowledge from different epistemics. And this takes us out of the monodisciplinary mode of doing things with which we are very familiar. Now I can say I'm an economist, or I'm a physicist, or I'm a sociologist, but we need all of this information, but not only from the disciplines, but we also need the knowledge that people have inherent in them from their own experiences. That experiential knowledge is very important. And as has been raised by our other speakers, we need to also acknowledge the uncertainty and incompleteness of what we know about climate change. Fundamentally because it is really a new problem, and we need to continually study and learn the changes that are happening. And therefore, we need to have state-of-the-art scientific knowledge. We really need to be at the cutting edge in all spheres and in all fields. We need to be able to attract consensus in terms of how we respond to this problem, what measures we put in place to mitigate or to adapt to the problem. And to have consensus, all our stakeholders must be fully involved and also fully aware of what is being done and why it is being done. So we need to also then consider the constraints that we have, some of which have been mentioned in terms of generating and also utilizing our knowledge. Okay, so climate change basically presents to us a number of opportunities, and I'm talking about this in a fairly broad sense. We see rapid societal and global environmental changes, which are already happening now, and these are very disruptive. And when you have disruptive effects, then you need to also, it drives one into considering new ways of doing things, into considering innovative ways of responding. So we have an opportunity there, similar to the pandemic that has also happened here. It has disrupted our lives, and we are quickly adapting and trying to get into the stream with this new change in the world. Climate change also impacts on all the different sectors that we can mention, and in the region here, agriculture and livestock really very heavily impacted. Water is a major issue in the area, energy, health, wildlife and tourism, and others. We also in the region have a fairly high degree of poverty. And we have a lot of programs which are being implemented by governments to deal with the issue of poverty reduction, or if you want to be a positivist, of wealth creation. And these efforts are actually being undermined by climate change. But we have an opportunity to again innovate in this sphere and come up with new sustainable development programs and policies and actions that will ensure that we maintain our well-being and really reduce that gap in adaptation. We also recognize that we need holistic and cross-sectoral approaches to address climate change impacts. The sectoral approach, which has been the way of doing things for very, very many years and decades, is not going to answer this question. It's not going to help us to achieve our sustainable development goals. So we need to recognize that there is that interconnection, but we also need to recognize that they are not only interconnected, but that they could be region-specific, depending on the geography of the area, the societal setup in that particular area, the ecological particularities of a particular area. Now we're very happy to see, of course, that policy and decision makers and practitioners, as well as the public, are actually demanding for more evidence-based or for evidence-informed science in order to be able to address the issues and the problems that climate change is posing from their own different perspectives. And that's a big opportunity. Then we have the issue of adaptive governance and management. The capacity for this is still quite low, but because we'll be dealing with things like scenarios, we're dealing with things like trade-offs, we need to enhance people's capacity to actually incorporate these adaptive governance and management views and approaches in the way things are being done. We have, again, in the region, many countries which are setting up and adopting green economy principles, and many countries already in the region already have strategies pertaining to this. And moving into this mode requires us to really advance our science, our technology, and our innovations in order to keep pace with what we require in order to conform with the dictates of the Paris Agreement. I think another important thing here is that the private sector and industry are actually getting a lot more involved in environmental stewardship. So many of them now have internal policies which have positive approaches to the environment, to climate change adaptation and mitigation, basically in order to reduce the risks to their business. But at the same time, it enhances that environmental stewardship and helps us all as humanity to build our resilience. Now, if I come up to the ICCA, that is our Institute for Climate Change and Adaptation at the University of Nairobi, we basically have 5 broad thematic areas around which we work. And we have 4 core objectives. One is to build a human capacity that we need to address climate change and adaptation needs of the African societies. We also encourage action-oriented research activities to improve climate adaptation capacity of our African people. And as I mentioned, this is part of that transdisciplinarity where we bring in society itself to work with us in our research. We also provide a framework for national and regional policy assessments and advice to governments and other public and private sector actors. And this is an active and really ongoing component of our program. And we also include the grassroots and various communities within the African region in our program execution and implementation of research findings. So this is basically the context within which we are working, recognizing, in fact, that what we need is a climate literate society. We need a critical mass of human capacity that can actually think broadly to address this particular problem, to appreciate the different disciplines that are required and to appreciate the different approaches that can be initiated in order to address the challenges that we face from climate change. So just as an example here, if you look at the two photographs on your left, we see some of the devastating impacts of drought. And, you know, the farmer or the pastoralist, they want answers. How are we going to deal with this particular problem? It's not enough now just to say that, oh, well, we're going to get you an agricultural extension, you know, expert who is going to help you to deal with it. We must think of it in terms of the context of how climate is going to continually impact on that particular sector, bearing in mind again that we are dealing with ever-changing baselines, and therefore we have to constantly adjust our thinking to problem solving in that area. On the right-hand side, we're looking at some fairly long records. On the top, it's a record of Lake Tanganyika surface temperatures over a period of about 1,500 years. And at the bottom is rainfall variation in the Naivasha area over a period of about 1,000 years. And we see interdecadal scale changes that are occurring. So while most of us will respond very quickly to changes at seasonal level or at interannual level, we have to consider intergenerational aspects which indicate to us that we can have even bigger changes than we have actually seen in recent years because of this interdecadal scale variability. So we must think about the intergenerational aspects and what those particular changes would mean to our society and to societal well-being, to sustainable development in the long term. So in order to address the capacity needs, we have, I've outlined here just some. Really, these are not all the areas that we really need to build in the capacity, but I think that they are critical ones. One is this song that we've sung for so many years, that we need data and we need to monitor. And it cannot be overemphasized because without data, you don't have a scientific evidence base for decision making. So it is very key that this is one of the things that is embedded in programs going into the future. We also need to build capacity in terms of integrated evaluations or synthesis or modeling. And that is because the problem cannot be approached from a sectoral perspective or from a monodisciplinary perspective. People must work together and must be able to appreciate the contributions that different areas can have to help solve the problem. We also have seen, major advances in ICT and its use in very many different areas in science, with the big data science, artificial intelligence, remote sensing capabilities have also increased, allowing us in many ways to collect new data, to analyze new information or pre-existing information in new ways, to crunch so much that we could not be able to do previously. These advances are there and they need to be incorporated in the climate learning. Scenarios development are important, and we are quite familiar with now the modeling results, the scenario generation. But we can also have the participatory scenarios whereby we bring in society to tell us what are their views, how do they see the future evolving, and how can they act under different kinds of scenarios. All of these are capacities that need to be built to help us to be able to better understand the problems that we have and to deal with them in an appropriate manner. So I've already mentioned that we need to have active stakeholder engagement in design, planning, and implementation. And that is one of the things that we do in our programs. And it works out extremely well, and it really helps to build capacity so that once someone has finished their research work, they also have had some impact on the community or in the areas in which they're working. Effective communication is extremely important. It had been mentioned, I think, earlier that we have journalists and we have other people who communicate this climate information. We have many youth groups also communicating climate information. How can this information be simplified and given out to society in a manner which is easily digestible, understandable, and actionable? So that's another key area. Governance and institutional strengthening is an area that really needs to be also worked on quite a bit. There are new ways of doing things, new tools, for example, for trade-off analysis, for scenario analysis, for negotiations and other aspects. And so there's a whole spectrum there that is open for capacity building. Formal and informal education and awareness creation is another important area. We know, of course, that here in Kenya, for example, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry is now working on a national climate learning strategy. And this is really the way to go forward, to begin to mainstream climate education at all levels and to create awareness to the entire society using different communication media and different platforms, including the ICT platforms. And now just to finish off, and this is what our guru, Professor Wandiga, likes to say, let's not talk about STEM. Let us talk about STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and management, because we need to look at the climate change problem holistically. We cannot look at it from a fixed monodisciplinary perspective or from a set of clustered disciplines. We need to look at it in a very holistic manner. So we need to generate capacities, people with capacities to think broadly, to understand, at least to some extent, different approaches from different disciplines and to integrate these and to work together to help us come to solutions that will be effective, that will be sustainable, and that will help us to actually move forward in terms of mitigating climate change and adapting to changes in our region. So thank you very much. I think that is it from me.